You know exactly what this video is going to be about from the title. It's a massive list full of facts about World War II's obscure battles. Easy. So let's not faff about and let's just go! The Battle of Taiwan. Let's start with a controversial one. The Battle of Taiwan. Why is it controversial, you ask? Well, that would be because it occurred between the 1st of September and November the 9th, 1937, 2 years before World War II is commonly accepted to have begun. You see, the actual start date of World War II is a surprisingly controversial thing. Most historians believe that it began on the 1st of September, 1939, when Germany declared war on Poland. But to some, in particular many Chinese historians, it began on the 7th of July, 1937, when Japan invaded China. And we'll let you decide which you prefer. As for the Battle of Taiwan itself, however, it was part of Japan's broader strategy to seize control of northern China. Taiwan is a city with an extensive network of coal mines, and it was a natural target, so it was descended upon by 140,000 Japanese troops. The Chinese forces managed to muster double that number in defense, but it was to no avail. They simply couldn't compete against the superior training, equipment, and logistics that Japan had at its disposal, and so it proved to be a catastrophic loss for China, with them losing control of Taiwan and taking just shy of 130,000 casualties in the process. Japan, for its part, secured a victory at a cost of around 30,000 casualties. The Battle of Shanghai. Let's keep things controversial for now and have a look at another pre-Poland battle in China, the Battle of Shanghai, which was fought between the 13th of August and the 26th of November 1937. It occurred at a time when things were going very well for the Imperial Japanese Army, the IJA, which, having recently started its invasion, as we just discussed, was sweeping its way down through the Chinese coast with lightning speed. Shanghai, being a major shipping and industrial center, was naturally a place that the IJA was quite keen to secure, and so they pulled out at all the stops for the battle, mustering 300,000 troops, 500 aircraft, 500 tanks, and 130 ships. The Chinese forces, similarly, were every bit as keen to keep Shanghai as the IJA was to take it, and so they mustered a whopping 700,000 troops for the defense, but thanks to their technological inferiority, could only gather 180 aircraft and 40 tanks. What ensued was a Japanese amphibious landing, at least 13 uses of poison gas by the IJA, and the single largest urban battle that had ever happened up to that point, with the record only being surpassed by the Battle of Stalingrad several years later. The fighting was simply brutal, and when all was said and done, Shanghai stood in absolute ruins, and the flag of the rising sun waved over the rubble. For this result, Japan had taken anywhere from 20 to 100,000 casualties and inflicted 180 to 250,000 upon the Chinese. The Third Battle of Changsha. Let's now move away from the controversial ones and have a look at the battle on the Chinese front that everyone agrees is a part of World War II. The Third Battle of Changsha, which was fought from the 24th of December 1941 to the 15th of January 1942. And just like our first two battles, this one was big, as the Chinese committed over 300,000 troops and the Japanese 120,000. Unlike our first two battles, however, which had a simple enough aim, the IJA wanting to take a city of some kind, the motivations behind the Japanese starting this one a little bit more complicated, as it wasn't intended to take territory, not directly anyway, but rather it was intended to tie up and debilitate the Chinese forces in Hannut province and prevent them moving southwards to Hong Kong, which had been invaded by the Japanese on the 8th of December and was putting up an annoyingly stubborn resistance. Unfortunately for Japan, however, at Changsha, the Chinese forces managed to do something that, up until that point, had been a major struggle for them: win. And this cost the Japanese up to 50,000 casualties for up to 28,000 of their own. Further still, in much the same way that the Battle of Midway is seen as the beginning of the end of Japanese domination on the waves, the Third Battle of Changsha is seen as the beginning of the end of their domination in continental Asia, as in the future their victories would become far more Pyrrhic and lesser in number. The Battle for Hong Kong. And while we're on the topic, let's give the Battle of Hong Kong a quick once-over, because it is one that is direly overlooked. Its being overlooked is quite understandable, however, because at the time that the IJA invaded Hong Kong, Japanese forces also attacked Pearl Harbor, British Malaya, the Philippines, Thailand, Borneo, Guam, and Wake Islands, in a simply enormous campaign intended to bring huge swaths of East Asia under their control in one fell swoop. Given that the first one of those is just a tad famous and the sheer size of the overall operation, it's understandable that the Battle of Little Hong Kong, to which Japan committed barely 27,000 troops, has been overlooked somewhat in the historical zeitgeist. As for the battle itself, it began on the 8th of December 1941 and saw a British-led up to 15,000 strong coalition of British, Indian, Chinese, Canadian, and even French troops lead a fighting retreat down the Kowloon Peninsula before fleeing to Hong Kong Island proper by the 13th, intent on holding out until reinforcements could arrive. Due to the wider situation in Asia, however, no help would come, and the defending army eventually surrendered on Christmas Day, having suffered up to 3,000 casualties and costing the Japanese barely 700. The Battle of Madagascar. Let's move away from China now and look toward Africa, because there we are certainly spoiled for choice when it comes to obscure World War II battles, and a great example of which is the Battle of Madagascar, which was fought between the 5th of May and the 6th of November 1942. It came about because following the fall of France in June 1940, Madagascar, which was then a French colony, had fallen under control of Vichy France, the Nazi French puppet regime. This in turn led to Japan being allowed to use the island's strategic ports to attack Allied shipping off the east coast of Africa. This was deemed unacceptable, and thus Madagascar had to be taken. This was done by an up to 15,000-strong Imperial British coalition made up of British, of course, Indian, Rhodesian, and South African troops who squared off against 8,000 Vichy French defenders. The battle itself proved easy enough, and come November the Vichy French leadership had been deposed and replaced with a Free French one instead, for a cost of 107 attackers and 152 defenders killed. The Battle of Beirut. Let's stay with the Vichy French theme for now, but take a look at a battle in which it wasn't Imperial British forces who came to give them a good shoeing, but also some of their own countrymen. The Battle of Beirut, which was fought on the 12th of July 1941 and was part of the broader Operation Exporter, which aimed to kick out the Vichy French government from Syria and Lebanon and replace it with a Free French one, just like we saw at the Battle of Madagascar. For some reason, certain details about this one are particularly scant. We know that on the Allied side were units from the Australian 7th Division, the 5th Indian Brigade, the 1st Free French Division, the British 1st Cavalry Division, 6th Division, and the Special Service Brigade, a precursor force to the Commandos. But as for the specific numbers deployed, nothing, at least that we could find. And we looked. It gets weirder still, because for the Vichy French, who fought alone, it's beyond difficult to find reference to which of their units fought, but we do have the numbers. Up to 45,000 soldiers, 90 tanks, 120 field pieces, and 90 aircraft. As for the battle itself, again, the details are fuzzy in our sources, but it appears as though the battle was actually just an unopposed march into Beirut to formalize an earlier negotiated ceasefire and surrender, and so no one was killed, but don't quote us on that. We do know, however, that after the surrender, Operation Exporter was complete, with Syria coming under complete control of the Free French Charles de Gaulle. The battle for the Hague. Over to the Netherlands now for a look at the Battle of the Hague, which was part of the German invasion of the Netherlands in 1940. This battle was defined by one thing and one thing alone: paratroopers, and a hell of a lot of them. This battle was the first opposed airborne assault in history. It was fought on the 10th of May and saw German forces paratroopers drop en masse onto the many Dutch airfields surrounding it, which, for obvious reasons, the Germans were rather keen to get their hands on. But important though they were but a sideshow in this battle, because the real objective was the Dutch royal family and government, specifically to apprehend them and use them to force the Netherlands' immediate capitulation. Fortunately, the Dutch forces were surprisingly well prepared for a mass airborne assault, and so they mounted a vigorous defense that saw them quickly retake all of the airfields that the German paratroopers seized, and also stop them from capturing the Hague, and thus the royal family. The cost of this defense? A little over 1,500 Dutch casualties and the infliction of a little under 3,000 on the Germans. The Battle of Crete. We were a bit reluctant to actually include this one, as while it is no Stalingrad or Berlin in the historical zeitgeist, it certainly isn't exactly mega unheard of. But it's another fascinating use of German paratroopers, so let's just squeeze it in anyway. Codenamed Operation Mercury, the Battle of Crete took place from the 20th of May to the 1st of June 1941. Further to what we just said, however, an interesting extra detail about this battle is not only that it was another mass use of German paratroopers, but that it was also the first invasion in history to be carried out mainly by them. As you no doubt guessed from the name, it centered around the island of Crete, which at the time was part of Greece and heavily defended by additional Allied forces, specifically British, Australian, and New Zealand troops. The Germans wanted it primarily for use as a base for their Mediterranean operations, but also to prevent the British from using it as a springboard for operations in the Balkans. The Germans won the day, but it was a very Pyrrhic victory, as a number of issues presented themselves that they simply hadn't planned for. Firstly, the island was way heavier defended than their intelligence had led them to believe, and secondly, the Cretan people didn't exactly take kindly to the torrent of paratroopers pouring from the sky, and so they resisted en masse. Many a German paratrooper met his end at the end of a farmer's pitchfork as he writhed about on the floor trying to shake his parachute loose. When all that was said and done, the defenders suffered 23,000 casualties from over 42,000 deployed, and the attackers suffered just under 6,000 casualties from just under 25,000 deployed. Battle of the Scheldt. Let's go back to the Netherlands, and also Belgium for now, but roll the clock forward a few years to take a look at the Battle of the Scheldt, which was fought from the 2nd of October to the 8th of November 1944. It was a critical operation of the post-D-Day Western Front and aimed to secure the Scheldt estuary and open the port of Antwerp for Allied shipping, which was direly needed to properly supply both troops during immediate operations in France and the Lowlands and for a future push into the German heartland. The attack was led by the 1st Canadian Army, with substantial contributions from British, Polish, and other Allied forces, and saw more than 450,000 men sent in. They faced around 230,000 German defenders who were very well dug in along a strong strategic position, and just to make things even more difficult, they had also flooded much of the surrounding land, severely restricting the attackers' maneuverability and forcing them to advance along narrow, predictable channels where the Germans would be waiting for them in force. The Canadians and their allies opted for multiple amphibious assaults to attempt to circumvent the German strategic advantage, but even then, flooded and muddy terrain was never too far away, which created simply hellish conditions to fight in. But despite that, the attackers won the day, and Antwerp and its juicy port were seized by the Allies. It came at a heavy price, however, just shy of 21,000 casualties on the Allied side compared to a comparatively modest 12-ish thousand for the Germans. The Second Happy Time. The Second Happy Time campaign, we kid you not, that's what it was actually known as, was a strategic submarine campaign launched by Germany against Allied shipping along the American East Coast from January through to August 1942, just immediately after the American entry into the war. The operation was masterminded by Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, who aimed to exploit the unpreparedness of American coastal defenses and target weak, unprotected merchant shipping right when it thought it had all but made it home, and thus let its guard down. And to say it went well would be rather an understatement, as it was nothing short of devastating. German U-boats patrolling the US East Coast from New York down to Florida and even into the Caribbean sunk over 609 Allied ships. Further to that, however, the success of the Second Happy Time lay not just in the ships it sent to the bottom of the sea, but in the abject fear it wrought upon the American establishment, because before this, many US planners had deemed that geography had rendered them all but untouchable during the war, and now they were forced to contend with the fact that this was really not the case. Battle of Tolvaj&auml. We now find ourselves back in another controversial battle, the Battle of Tolvaj&auml, which was fought on the 12th of December 1939. And why is this controversial, you might ask? Well, that would be because it was part of the 1939 to 1940 Winter War between Finland and the Soviet Union, which, despite its timing, i.e. after the invasion of Poland, some historians don't count as part of World War II, as Finland had yet to join the Axis powers, and the Soviets, similarly, had yet to join the Allies. For our purposes today, however, seeing as how some historians include it, claiming the distinction to be pedantic and moot in real terms, we'll just roll with it and include it. As for the battle specifically, however, it took place north of Lake Ladoga in what is today the Republic of Karelia, Russia, and was notable for one major reason. It was the first major Finnish victory in the conflict. The Finnish forces, led by Colonel Paavo Talvela, were significantly outnumbered, with approximately 4,000 troops facing a Soviet force of around 20,000 men from the 139th Rifle Division. Despite this disparity, the Finnish strategy was to execute a pincer movement to encircle and defeat the Soviet forces at Tolvaj&auml. The plan also involved attacks across frozen lakes, a genius move that allowed the Finnish forces maneuverability and flexibility that simply couldn't be found anywhere else in that region. The losses they inflicted on the Soviets were simply staggering. Up to 5,000 killed, more than 5,000 wounded, and 59 armored vehicles destroyed, for a shockingly slight comparative loss of 100 or so killed and around 250 wounded. Further to the numbers, however, it was also a monumental strategic victory. The Finns completely halted the Soviet advance in that sector and prevented the encirclement of their forces elsewhere. The Siege of Lille. The Siege of Lille, often referred to as the Lille Pocket, occurred during the Battle of France and lasted from the 28th to the 31st of May 1940. There, the French forces, consisting of the 9th and 5th Corps of the First Army, around 40,000 men in total, under the command of General René Pro, were tasked with defending the city against a German assault most fierce, around 160,000 men split between 4 infantry and 3 panzer divisions. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the French forces managed to hold their positions well, repelling major German penetrations for several days. Given the fact that barely 50 miles to the north, Operation Dynamo, the mass evacuation of 340,000 British and French troops from the collapsing French front, was underway, the stakes for holding Lille could not have been higher. Every minute won was another boatload of evacuees that could make it across the English Channel and live to fight another day. However, brave though the French defenders were, they were heavily outnumbered, and so their breaking was inevitable, and when it did finally break, 6,000 of the French soldiers lay dead, and the remaining 34,000 were taken into German captivity. For their part, the Germans suffered around 12,000 casualties, with it being unclear how many of those were killed. The Battle of Hannut fought between the 12th and the 14th of May 1940. The Battle of Hannut saw Belgian, French, and Dutch troops face the Germans in the titular town in Belgium. And even if it's lesser known, it was certainly not a modest affair, as it was the largest tank battle in history up to that point. During the battle, the German 16th Army Corps, equipped with over 600 tanks, engaged the French 1st and 2nd Light Mechanized Divisions, which had around 600 tanks between them. The primary German objective was to engage and pin down the strongest elements of the French 1st Army, diverting them from their main assault through the Ardennes as part of their Fall Gelb or Case Yellow offensive. The confrontation began when the German forces reached Hannut and faced stiff resistance from the French, who managed to conduct a tactical withdrawal while inflicting considerable losses on the German tanks. Despite the French not being able to hold Hannut, they succeeded in delaying the German advance and caused significant losses to their tank force, 52 destroyed and 111 damaged, rendering the German victory a Pyrrhic one. The Germans didn't care about such losses, however, because they had done exactly what they wanted, kept some of France's best troops busy while its main force punched its way through the Ardennes, which resulted in France's surrender a little over a month later. Number 13. The Battle of Odjak. At face value, there's little of note about the Battle of Odjak. It occurred between the 19th of April and the 25th of May 1945 and saw 23,000 partisans from the Yugoslav National Liberation Army square off against just under 2,000 soldiers from the Croatian army, Croatia during that time being a Nazi-controlled puppet state made from the broken-up Yugoslavia. Now, certainly, that's an obscure battle if we ever did hear of one, but there's a certain detail about this one that makes it rather important in the chronology of World War II. It was the last European battle of the war. So late was it, in fact, that it actually occurred 17 days after the formally recognized end of the war in Europe, which is typically recognized as being the 8th of May. This is the day that Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel signed the German Instrument of Surrender. As for how the battle played out, this was simple enough. The Croatian soldiers, all of whom were holdouts who refused to surrender, kept the partisans at bay for a time with their superior firepower and skills, but through determination and sheer brute force of numbers, the Yugoslav partisans eventually encircled them and destroyed them. When it comes to losses in action, sources are split on the matter. Some say that the Croatians were all killed, and some say that a few managed to flee at the final moment. As for the Yugoslavians, it appears as though they suffered around 3,000 killed and 7,000 wounded. The Battle of the Bay of Biscay. Let's shake things up a bit now by having a look at an obscure naval battle, specifically the Battle of the Bay of Biscay. This took place on the 28th of December 1943. The confrontation occurred when a flotilla of German destroyers and torpedo boats was tasked with escorting a blockade runner laden with vital supplies from Japan back to occupied Europe. On their way to meet said boat, they were intercepted by British naval forces, which consisted of the cruisers HMS Glasgow and HMS Enterprise. The opening shots were taken by Glasgow and Enterprise, which both opened up with their longer-ranged guns the second the German flotilla was in range. The Germans, for their part, however, weren't going to take it lying down, and so they turned to intercept. Unfortunately for them, however, fate was against them, as their efforts were thwarted by rough seas that all but negated the speed advantage of the smaller destroyers, and of the shots they did manage to get off, expert British maneuvers made sure that many of them simply fell harmlessly into the water. The Brits, however, they did score some good hits. Z-27 took a shell from Enterprise that went straight through her armor, carried on going through her boiler room and into an oil bunker, and sparked an enormous fire that raged throughout the entire ship. She defiantly let off one final salvo of torpedoes, all of which missed, and then began to drift. As the engines of the fire-engulfed ship slowly but surely died, it then fell to Glasgow to deliver the coup de grace, which pulled alongside the stricken destroyer and emptied a volley into its magazine at point-blank range, sinking her. Similarly, the torpedo boats T-25 and T-26 were also lost, and the surviving ships broke off and made for home. It was a catastrophic defeat for the Germans and a clear victory for the British. The First Battle of Sirte. Let's stick with naval battles for now and have a look at the First Battle of Sirte. Fought on the 17th of December 1941, it was an inconclusive naval engagement between the British Mediterranean Fleet and the Italian Royal Navy. It occurred in the Gulf of Sidra, southeast of Malta. It was also a bit of a weird one because it wasn't a matter of two naval forces squaring off and trying to sink each other, but rather a case of two fleets simply trying to protect convoys as they passed by each other. The British, for their part, aimed to supply Malta, while the Italians were transporting vital supplies to their forces in North Africa. The battle began when an Italian reconnaissance aircraft spotted the British convoy near Sidi Barrani. Both fleets fully sighted each other by late afternoon, but with neither side wanting a direct confrontation, the Italians moved into Sept, fired briefly, and called in some limited aerial assets before withdrawing to avoid the situation escalating. The British cruiser HMS Kipling was damaged during this, and minor damage was also reported on other British ships due to glancing hits and a few near misses. The British opted for a pure defensive stance, focusing on just trying to slip past without detouring to take any meaningful jabs at the Italian fleet. This was one of those battles where it's legitimately fair to say that both sides won. They both achieved their goal, getting their convoy through, and neither took much damage for their efforts. The Siege of Malta. The Siege of Malta is another one we're reluctant to include, as it by no means is unheard of, but certainly it's another one that has fallen through the historiographical cracks a little bit. So let's just go with it, lest we leave any needy stone unturned. It lasted from the 11th of June 1940 to the 20th of November 1942. Malta, then a British Crown colony, was a vital strategic location, for whoever held it possessed not only a vital logistical port deep in the heart of the Mediterranean, but also a veritable fortress of an island, one that could be used to unleash all manner of naughtiness on enemy shipping lanes to North Africa. The siege made Malta one of, if not arguably the most heavily bombed area of the war, with the tiny island taking an absolute battering. We don't know the exact tonnage that was dropped overall, but we do have a little snippet that showed that it was a lot. For example, 6,700 tons of bombs were dropped on the Grand Harbour alone, and the entire island was subject to over 3,000 bombing raids during the siege. The island started off as near defenseless too, starting out the siege with only a modest scattering of AA batteries and 3 obsolete Gloucester Gladiator biplanes for defense. More aerial assets slowly started to trickle in and improve the situation, but it wasn't until mid-1942 that things started to really turn around with the arrival of serious numbers of Spitfires and AA batteries. Between these beefed up defenses and shift in strategic priorities, the siege became too costly to maintain and was eventually called off, and the Brits managed to keep a hold of a vital location that would greatly aid their Mediterranean operations for the rest of the war. The Siege of Budapest. Another lesser-known siege was the Siege of Budapest, a brutal 50-day encirclement of and battle for the Hungarian capital by Soviet and Romanian forces, with both German and naturally Hungarian forces in defense. For saying that this is a relatively unknown battle, it wasn't exactly what you'd call a modest affair, as the attackers committed 177,000 men, 1,000 artillery pieces, and over 100 armored vehicles to the fray against defending numbers of 79,000 men, just under 500 artillery pieces, and 125 armored vehicles. It lasted from the 24th of December 1944 through to the 13th of December 1945 and saw a decisive victory for the Soviets and Romanians, ultimately marking the path for the total occupation of Hungary and eventually the final defeat of the Axis forces in Europe. The fighting was also absolutely brutal, as throughout this siege, fierce street fighting ensued, with both sides suffering heavy casualties as a result. The German and Hungarian forces lost around 137,000 men, including 30,000 Germans and 9,000 Hungarian soldiers killed, and 11,000 Germans and 29,000 Hungarians captured. The siege also claimed the lives of approximately 76,000 civilians, including 38,000 from military action, starvation, and mass executions by the ruling ultranationalist Arrow Cross Party. The siege also devastated Budapest's infrastructure, with over 80% of its buildings being damaged or destroyed. The Battle of Mokra. The Battle of Mokra was a short-lived battle fought on the 1st of September 1939, the very first day of the German invasion of Poland. It is notable for being a rare Polish victory and the first German defeat both of the campaign and of the entire war. The Polish forces, led by Julian Filipowicz, included the Volhynian Cavalry Brigade, the armored train Smiley, and the 7th Infantry Division. They faced the German 16th Panzer Corps, which was headed by George Hans Reinhardt and Friedrich Kirchner and comprised of the 4th and 1st Panzer Divisions, as well as the 31st and the 18th Infantry Divisions. At dawn, German forces crossed the Polish border and launched an assault on the Polish positions. Despite heavy bombardments and tank assaults, the Polish defenders, utilizing advantageous terrain and well-placed anti-tank guns, managed to repel multiple German attacks. The Polish armored train Smiali also played a crucial role in disrupting German advances and inflicting heavy losses as they attacked again and again. The battle also involved old-school cavalry charges and counterattacks by Polish tankettes, which temporarily halted German advances. By the end of the day, the Germans were forced to retreat to their initial positions and had suffered approximately 800 casualties and lost up to 160 vehicles, including 50 tanks. The Polish forces forces, for their part, incurred around 500 casualties, lost 300 horses, several guns, and one tankette. The Battle for the Sea of Azov. The Battle for the Sea of Azov took place from the 26th of September to the 11th of October 1941 on the Eastern Front and saw Axis forces, primarily made up of German and Romanian troops under the command of generals like Gerd von Rundstedt and Erich von Manstein, clashing with forces of the Soviet Southern Front led by Semyon Timoshenko. It occurred as part of a broader Axis effort to secure the northern shores of the Sea of Azov and advance into the Donbass and Crimea regions following their successful assault and occupation of Kiev. It started when the Soviets launched an attack against the German 11th Army and the Romanian 3rd Army to stop that advance. Initially, they achieved some success, pushing back the Romanian forces. However, the arrival of the German 1st Panzer Army under Ewald von Kleist turned the tide. On the 1st of October, Kleist's forces executed a surprise pincer maneuver and began encircling the Soviet 9th and 18th armies. They attempted to retreat, but were cut off and fully surrounded by the 7th of October. Over the next 4 days, the Axis forces tightened the noose and annihilated the trapped Soviet units. The battle resulted in a decisive Axis victory, with the capture of 106,332 Soviet troops, the destruction or capture of 212 tanks and 772 artillery pieces. Axis casualties were comparatively light, with 12,421 casualties, including 2,456 killed. The decisive victory unhinged the Soviet Southern Front and facilitated further German advances in line with their overall operational objectives. The Battle of the Dukla Pass. The Battle of the Dukla Pass took place from the 8th of September to the 28th of October 1944 at the border between present-day Slovakia and Poland. This battle was part of the Soviet East Carpathian Offensive, which was aimed at supporting the Slovak national uprising against Nazi Germany. The operation involved the Soviet Union's 1st Ukrainian Front under Marshal Ivan Konev and Czechoslovak 1st Army Corps against the German 1st Panzer Army and elements of the Hungarian 1st Army. The Soviets initiated the battle and wanted to break through the heavily fortified Dukla Pass and reach Prešov within 5 days. However, intense German resistance turned the battle into a prolonged and bloody conflict, with the Soviets only reaching Slovakia after almost a month. From there, the battle extended to eastern Slovakia, leading to fierce clashes such as the Fight for Hill 534 and the so-called Valley of Death. The Soviet and Czechoslovak forces eventually captured the region, but the operation did not achieve its primary goal of rapidly aiding the Slovak insurgents. The whole time they were cut off and on their own. Ultimately, without help, they were crushed. The battle involved 378,000 Soviet and 16,700 Czechoslovak troops against 100,000 German and Hungarian soldiers. Soviet casualties were substantial, with 10,000 killed and 41,000 wounded. German and Hungarian losses were estimated at around 70,000, with the exact breakdown of killed to wounded being hard to come by. The First Battle of Kharkov. The First Battle of Kharkov occurred from the 20th through to the 24th of October 1941 as part of the German invasion of the Soviet Union via Operation Barbarossa. The conflict centered on the German 6th Army's efforts to capture Kharkov, a strategic industrial and transportation hub in the Ukrainian SSR, which was being defended by the Soviet 38th Army. The Germans aimed to secure the city to close a growing gap between their forces and disrupt Soviet logistics and industrial capabilities. It was ultimately an easy German victory, though Soviet authorities had evacuated or destroyed most industrial facilities. The battle was fought by the German 55th Army Corps, which included 2 divisions, and a Stug assault gun battalion, giving them between 10 and 30,000 troops, and 12 Stug 3s. The Soviets, by comparison, had an uncertain but almost certainly larger number from the 40th Army. German casualties remain unclear, but Soviet losses were substantial, with just over 96,000 soldiers killed. Kharkov's capture was a huge boon for the Germans, thanks to its vital rail connections and military production, particularly the Kharkov tractor plant, which manufactured T-34 tanks. The Battle of Reunion. Back to the Pacific now to take a look at the Battle of Reunion, which was fought on a single day, the 28th of November 1942. It was an amphibious operation conducted by the Free French Naval Forces to seize control of Reunion Island from Vichy France. The operation was led by the destroyer Leopard, which carried around 74 troops. They landed at Saint-Denis, the capital of Reunion, and quickly secured the city with the support of local resistance facing minimal opposition. The islands, previously under the Vichy regime, had limited defenses, about 260 men, 3 officers, and minimal artillery. The Vichy loyalists, led by Governor Pierre Hubert, initially planned to resist, but eventually surrendered after brief clashes made it clear resistance wouldn't end well for them, particularly at the coastal battery of Le Port, where Vichy forces fired on Leopard, resulting in minor non-fatal casualties. Overall, the Free French lost 1 man, while the Vichy forces had 2 killed and at least 1 wounded. Governor André Cauchory, appointed by Charles de Gaulle, arrived and took over the administration, calling for unity and calm. The successful takeover effectively brought for reunion into the Allied camp. The Battle of Christmas Island. Another tiny battle of the Pacific Theatre was the Battle of Christmas Island. This one lasted for a whole 2 days, specifically the 31st of March and the 1st of April 1942, and was a decisive Japanese victory over the British Empire. Christmas Island, then a British colony important for its phosphate resources, a vital strategic resource used in munitions production, was initially defended by 32 British and Indian troops, but the battle was actually preceded by a mutiny on the 10th of March, in which the Indian troops turned, killed their British counterparts, 5 in total, and welcomed the Japanese. They arrived on the 31st of March when the battle, if you can call it that, formally began. They brought with them 850 infantry, supported by 3 light cruisers, 8 destroyers, and 2 troop transports. Naturally, they landed without resistance, raising a white flag the moment the Japanese were on the horizon and allowing the Japanese to disembark unopposed. There was some action from a nearby US submarine, the Seawolf, which took a pot shot at one of the Japanese cruisers, the Naka, severely damaging but not sinking it. That's about it, and the Japanese successfully occupied the island. Japanese attempted to resume phosphate production, but many workers fled inland, and thus their efforts proved largely unsuccessful. Eventually, with the island proving to have little value beyond denial to the British war effort, the occupation force was reduced to a 20-man garrison. After the war, 7 of the mutineers were court-martialed, with their death sentences commuted to life imprisonment following diplomatic negotiations between the UK, India, and Pakistan. The Battle of Borneo. And now for a much bigger but equally lesser-known battle of the Pacific Theatre. The Battle of Borneo, which was a campaign by Japanese forces to control Borneo Island, focusing on the Raj of Sarawak, Brunei, North Borneo, and Dutch-controlled Kalimantan. More specifically, they wanted the island's rich petroleum reserves. It played out from the 16th of December 1941 to the 1st of April 1942. Also, since Borneo was a split British-Dutch colony at that time, their troops naturally fought side by side in defense. Spearheading the Japanese offensive was the 35th Infantry Brigade, led by Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi. His invasion began with a Japanese convoy departing from formerly French Indochina and landing on Borneo's northern shores and quickly capturing Miri, Syria, and Lutong with little resistance. The Allies were both outnumbered and outmatched against the Japanese, with them barely having 4,000 troops, even including police and paramilitary units, as compared to Japan's 4,500 grizzled veterans. Japan also committed 2 heavy cruisers, a light cruiser, and 6 destroyers to their effort, with the defenders having next to no naval assets to call on at all. The battle was always going to be a decisive victory for the Japanese, just from that alone, but the defenders did manage to sneak some limited successes here and there, such as the Dutch managing to sink the destroyer Shinonome, but successes such as these were few and far between, and with them getting ever more pushed back and devastated, they eventually threw in the towel and surrendered, having suffered around 2,300 casualties and costing the Japanese around 600 in return. The Battle of Mount Song. We haven't heard from the Chinese front for a while, have we? So let's pop back over there and look at the Battle of Mount Song, which raged from the 4th of June to the 7th of September 1944. It was part of the Burma campaign and aimed to reopen the Burma Road, a vital logistics thoroughfare that fed Allied material aid to the Chinese, but had been closed since the Japanese occupied Burma in 1942. China, supported by the US, mustered 20,000 troops for the effort, and with Mount Song only being held by a 1,300-strong Japanese detachment, 300 of whom were wounded from previous battles, they figured it would be a cakewalk. What they hadn't accounted for, however, was the fact that the Japanese had turned the mountain into a fortress with extensive tunnels, bunkers, and earthworks plastered all over it. This led to the Chinese having a hard fight, as every inch gained had to be paid for in blood, a payment which was usually extracted head-on from atop a vast, indomitable wall of hardened concrete, or from behind as the Japanese opened yet another well-concealed peephole behind the attackers. The difficulty of the fight also bought the Japanese the time needed to reinforce the mountain, making the Chinese effort ever harder as time went on. Eventually, however, after taking just shy of 8,000 casualties, of which 4,000 were killed, the Chinese managed to burn through the Japanese reinforcements, break through their lines, and take the mountain, costing them over 3,000 killed and an unknown number wounded. However, despite the vast cost paid, the Chinese had succeeded in their objective, as after the battle, the Burma Road was reopened, and Allied supplies could once again flow to them overland. The Battle of Mutanchiang. Let's stay on the Chinese front for a little bit longer, but now pivot to one whose combatants were a little more out of the ordinary. Specifically, the Soviets and the Japanese, the Battle of Mutanchiang. Fought between the 12th and the 16th of August 1945 as part of the Soviet invasion invasion of Manchuria, it saw Soviet forces aim to rapidly advance and encircle the local Japanese forces so that their retreat could be prevented and they could be destroyed once and for all. Seeing exactly what they were up to, the Japanese Fifth Army attempted to sacrifice themselves to buy some time for other units to get out of there, and despite suffering horrific losses, they achieved their goal. How many losses, you ask? Well, the Japanese took up to 25,000 casualties from a force of 60,000, and the Soviets took 10,000 from a force of just under 300,000. The Battle of Elephant Point. Also of note is the Battle of Elephant Point, an airborne operation undertaken by Indian paratroopers fighting for the British Empire on the 1st of May 1945 as part of the wider Operation Dracula, a large-scale assault on Yangon, the nominal capital of British Burma, which had been held by the Japanese since 1942. The Indian unit, a temporary ad hoc unit formed from various elements of the 44th Indian Airborne Division, was tasked with neutralizing a coastal battery at Elephant Point in order to allow the 26th Indian Infantry Division to sail up the Yangon River and conduct a large-scale amphibious assault on the city. Dropping early in the morning, the battalion advanced quickly despite friendly fire from US bombers and torrential rain, successfully capturing Elephant Point after intense fighting. The battalion then held its position until relieved by the 26th Indian Division following their capture of Yangon the following day. Now, we wish we could tell you more, but the details about this battle are weirdly scant. We know everything about its planning and even its tactical execution, but as far as numbers, both overall committed and casualties, there's nothing. The Battle of Uman. Back to Europe now for another big one that you likely haven't come across before, the Battle of Uman, which was fought from the 15th of July to August the 8th, 1941, during the opening stages of Operation Barbarossa, and saw the combined Axis forces of Germany, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia square off against the Soviets. The battle saw the Axis forces going on the offensive with the aim of encircling the Soviet 6th and 12th armies. As it was an Operation Barbarossa battle, it happened amidst the background of near total strategic collapse amongst the Soviet forces, with the 6th and 12th specifically being absolutely battered and depleted following an earlier German penetration of the Stalin Line, a fortification network in the Western Soviet Union. When the shooting started, Axis forces quickly encircled the beleaguered Soviets, who were simply unable to resist repeated and coordinated assaults from their still fresh and motivated opponents. It was a decisive and crushing victory, with the Axis forces taking only 21-ish thousand casualties from their force of 400,000 men, and the Soviets taking over 103,000 casualties and having a further 100,000 captured from their force of 203,000. The Battle of Point 175. The Battle of Point 175 occurred from the 29th of November to the 1st of December 1941 near Sidi Rezekh in Libya as part of the Western Desert Campaign. It was intended to relieve the besieged garrison at Tobruk. It also followed an earlier battle at the same location, as the 2nd New Zealand Infantry Division had initially captured Point 175 on the 23rd of November, and now the Italians, 9,000 strong, were coming to try and take it back. This should have been an easy win for the Kiwis, tired though they were, but following early tactical blunders, such as mistaking Italian tanks for South African ones, which led to the capture of 167 soldiers, it proved a far harder fought fight than it ought to have been. So hard, in fact, that the Kiwis ultimately lost, being pushed off at Point 175 and taking just over 4,500 casualties for their troubles. They did make the Italians pay for it, however, costing them just under 6,000 casualties. The Battle of Gabon. And now for something completely different, a sub-Saharan African battle, of which there aren't really that many in World War II. The Battle of Gabon. Raging from October the 27th to the 12th of November 1940, it saw Free French forces, led by General Charles de Gaulle, attempting to capture Gabon from Vichy France, not only to help establish Free France as the legitimate French government, but also to deny the region's many resources to the Axis war effort. The battle began when Free French forces crossed into Gabon, and they quickly captured Icirc, followed by La Marine by the 5th of November. The main force, under General Philippe Leclerc and Battalion Chief Marie-Pierre Koenig, then aimed for Libreville with British naval support, which fell on the 10th of November. That just left one Vichy stronghold, Port Gentil, which surrendered 2 days later, bringing the battle to an end. The Free French suffered between 20 and 100 casualties, while Vichy France lost at least 35 men, 1 submarine scuttled, and 1 patrol boat destroyed. The Battle of Corregidor. The Battle of Corregidor, fought from the 5th through the 6th of May 1942, was a significant Japanese victory in the Philippines. Corregidor Island, which sits just at the entrance of Manila Bay, was heavily fortified with extensive artillery and served as the last major Allied stronghold in the Philippines. And following the fall of Bataan in April 1942, which saw the surrender of most Allied forces, the Japanese were determined to crush this last remaining holdout of resistance and finally tie off their successful Philippines campaign. They began with an amphibious assault on the 5th that put 700 190 soldiers ashore to begin establishing a beachhead, a task that, despite stiff resistance from the 13,000 American and Filipino defenders, they achieved come dawn. Then it was a simple matter of the Japanese just putting more and more troops onto the beach until they overwhelmed the defending garrison, which, thanks to them having plenty of men spare following the fall of Bataan, didn't take long at all, although specific numbers are still hard to come by. When the island finally fell later that day, it came at a cost of 900 Japanese and 800 US Filipino lives, with the remainder of the garrison being taken prisoner. The Battle of Samar. The Battle of Samar, fought on the 25th of October 1944, was a smaller engagement within the larger naval battle of Leyte Gulf, one that unfolded off the coast of Samar Island in the Philippines. It saw the unit, Task Unit 7743, known as Taffy 3, commanded by Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, face the Japanese Second Fleet under Vice Admiral Taiga Kurita. Taffy 3, composed of 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts, was vastly outgunned by Kurita's fleet, which included 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Kurita's force, mistakenly believing they were engaging larger fleet carriers, attacked at dawn. Taffy 3's carriers launched aircraft in a desperate defensive measure, while their smaller ships launched aggressive torpedo attacks, creating chaos among the Japanese ships. Despite suffering heavy losses, including 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort, Taffy 3's actions inflicted significant damage on the Japanese, sinking 3 cruisers and damaging several other ships. The winner of this one is a contentious matter among historians, as both sides took quite the battering for their efforts, but typically it is described as a US strategic victory, as this defeat prevented the Japanese fleet from going on to interdict in the then ongoing invasion of Leyte Island in the Philippines by US forces. The Battle of Pindus. As we've yet to see much from Greece yet, beyond the Battle of Crete, let's now zoom in on one of their lesser-known battles, the Battle of Pindus, which took place between the 26th of October and the 13th of November 1940 in the titular Pindus Mountains. It saw up to 23,000 men of the Italian 3rd Alpine Division, Giulia, and the 47th Infantry Division, Bari, aiming to capture the town of Metsovo and strategic mountain passes around it. However, they faced fierce resistance from the Greek Pindus detachment under Colonel Konstantinos Davakis, who deployed 32,000 men for the defense. The Italians made some progress, capturing the village of Avusa, which sat 40 or so kilometers from the border, but they soon found themselves overstretched and encircled. When the Italians realized it was too late for them to make an orderly retreat, and a mad scramble back to the border ensued after punching through the Greek encirclement. Come the 13th of November, not only had the Battle of Pindus been won, but the whole wider Greek theatre had been cleared of the Italians, and in a tale as old as time, the Germans would have to come in later and clean the mess up for Italy. The Battle of San Marino. Sticking with the Italian theme now, the Battle of San Marino occurred from the 17th through the 20th of September 1944 and saw an Allied force mainly consisting of British, Indian, and Canadian troops attempt to push Italian and German troops out of the tiny microstate of San Marino, which they'd recently occupied after years of respecting its neutrality, in order to create a unified defensive line across the Italian peninsula. It kicked off with the 4th Indian Division pushing into San Marino and capturing key positions as they batted off heavy resistance from the defenders. In fact, so strong was their effort that one of their number, specifically Rifleman Sher Thapa, was even posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross for his actions during the battle. Come the 19th, the Allies had encircled fully the city, and the defenders surrendered the following day, with losses being 274 killed among the defenders and 323 among the attackers. In an unusual twist, San Marino sought compensation from Britain for damages to their country post-war, and perhaps surprisingly, they actually got a payout, being given £80,000 or about £2.8 million adjusted for inflation. The Battle of Sept. And since we haven't had a naval battle for a couple of entries, here's another one, the Battle of Sept. It's another short one, only being fought over the 22nd through the 23rd of October 1943 off the coast of France. It consisted of a force of the Royal Navy, made up of 1 light cruiser and 6 destroyers, attempting to intercept the German blockade runner Münsterland, which, thanks to intelligence gathered, they knew was carrying precious cargoes of latex and strategic metals. Little did they know, however, it was but a ruse, as a Kriegsmarine force consisting of 6 minesweepers and 5 torpedo boats was lying in wait to give them the business, and despite the tonnage differences of the two forces, the Germans pulled it out of the bag with this one, managing to sink the cruiser HMS Charybdis outright with torpedoes and forcing the crew of one of the destroyers HMS Limburn to scuttle her after rendering her non-operable. In addition to the ships, the British also lost 506 sailors killed in the attack, and the Germans lost nothing. As naval victories like this, though minor, were rare things indeed for Germany come 1943, the commander that led the effort, Franz Koloff, was awarded the Knight's Cross in recognition of his efforts. Operation Tidal Wave. If we wish to be pedantic, Operation Tidal Wave isn't really a battle per se, but since we want to get some aerial representation in today's video, let's just roll with it, as it's either this or trying to blag the Battle of Britain or the Battle of Midway as being lesser known, and, well, we're not going to do that, are we? That would be insane. So, with that said, Operation Tidal Wave was a US strategic bombing mission undertaken on the 1st of August 1943 against oil refineries in Ploiești, Romania. Aimed at crippling Axis fuel supplies, 177 B-24 Liberators flew from Libya to Romania, but sustained heavy losses thanks to navigational errors and very heavy AA defenses. Of 177 bombers, 53 were destroyed and 310 airmen were killed or went missing. The defenders, meanwhile, suffered a total of 7 fighters lost, 2 Romanian and 5 German, as well as 19 dead and 97 wounded. The raid did manage to destroy an estimated 40% of production capacity at Ploiești, but it came at such a heavy loss that the raid is typically considered a catastrophic loss for the Allies. Operation Jericho. Staying with the aerial kind of battle theme now, Operation Jericho, conducted on the 18th of February 1944, was an RAF mission to bomb Amiens prison in German-occupied France, but for a bit of an unconventional reason. The objective was to free French resistance fighters and political prisoners who were interned within and facing execution. To achieve this, they made use of the super lightweight and really super fast de Havilland Mosquito fighter bomber, several of them in fact, which flew low to both evade flak fire and to be able to bomb with what was, for the time, laser precision. As for what they would bomb with this precision, well, that would be the prison wall, allowing those within to do a runner for freedom. Despite challenging weather and strong defenses, the 18 Mosquitoes dispatched succeeded in breaching the prison and allowed 258 prisoners to escape, although 102 prisoners were killed in the process. As a result of this friendly fire, the operation remains a controversial one to this day, with some maintaining that the losses were acceptable because they were going to die anyway, and others maintaining that it was a blatant display of reckless disregard for Allied life by the RAF. The other Battle of Berlin. Famously, the Battle of Berlin, the last major battle of the European theatre, raged from the 16th of April to the 2nd of May 1945, and saw the very end of the demonetizable armband enthusiast himself, but we aren't interested in that one. Instead, we're interested in the other Battle of Berlin, which was fought in the skies over the city from the 18th of November 1943 to the 31st of March 1944. It was a mass bombing campaign, organized by Marshal of the Royal Air Force Arthur Harris, the head of Bomber Command, who believed that a concentrated bombing effort could potentially end the war. The campaign consisted of 16 main raids on Berlin and numerous others on German cities, with them being intended to spread AA defenses thin to increase success over the capital. Over 7,000 RAF crew members were killed or captured, with 1,047 bombers lost and 1,682 damaged. The campaign's success is hotly debated, however, because while it might have leveled vast amounts of the city, rendered 800,000 people homeless, killed at least 7,500 people, and injured around a further 17,000, many doubt its effectiveness in hastening Germany's surrender, which after all wouldn't come until over a year after its end. The Aarhus Raid. Another Mosquito raid now to polish off this little diversion into aerial battle, specifically the Aarhus Raid of the 31st of October 1944, which saw 25 Mosquitoes bomb the Gestapo headquarters at Aarhus University in Denmark. It was another low-level precision raid, just as in Operation Jericho, and so didn't intend to level Aarhus as one may picture when imagining a raid, but instead just to get in, destroy the target, and get out. As for why they were doing this, beyond just the objectively good thing of taking alive Gestapo officers and changing them into dead Gestapo officers, it was aimed at destroying the Gestapo archives that were held deep inside the headquarters. The attack commenced at 11:41 a.m., with successive waves dropping both high explosives and incendiary bombs. The raid successfully destroyed the Gestapo officers and archives, killed 39 German personnel, including 27 SS officers, and severely damaged an adjacent German barracks. However, the raid also resulted in civilian casualties, including around 10 Danish construction workers at the university. Naturally then, just as with Operation Jericho, the Aarhus Raid remains a controversial operation to this day. The Battle of Nuremberg. Back to the normal battles now, with the Battle of Nuremberg, which was fought from the 16th to the 20th of April 1945, and saw the US and German armies face off against each other, with the latter being supplemented by elements of the Russian Liberation Army, Russian volunteers in German service, and members of the Hitler Youth. As it occurred right at the very end of the war, it was little but a frantic and desperate effort to cling on to the city of Nuremberg as the walls of the Nazi Empire came crumbling in. Even had the defenders claimed victory, it would have been naught but a delay of the inevitable. The US forces, led by Major Generals John Od&auml and Robert Frederick, attacked from the east and northeast, unexpectedly bypassing German defenses. Despite being heavily outnumbered and the inevitability of their situation, German forces under Karl Hals fiercely defended the city, resulting in extensive destruction. The Americans gradually advanced, capturing key areas such as the marshalling yard, the suburbs, and the airport by the 17th. Throughout all of this, the old city faced relentless shelling. By the 20th, it was all over, and Hals, refusing to surrender, was gunned down in the police station. His second-in-command, Colonel Richard Wolfe, ordered the surrender, and the American flag was raised in Adolf Hitler Platz, marking the battle's end. The Battle of Heilbronn. Another late-war German whizzing into the wind battle now, specifically the Battle of Heilbronn, which was also fought in April 1945 from the 4th to the 12th. And in yet another parallel, it also saw US forces face the Germans again, with the latter once again desperately trying to cling on in the face of inevitable overall defeat. The US initiated the battle with an early morning river crossing and found themselves immediately facing fierce counterattacks. Progress was slow due to the German use of tunnels for surprise attacks and strongholds in the city's industrial areas, both of which demanded American blood be spilt for every bit of ground gained in the city. American engineers did attempt to build bridges to ease their crossing, but with the Germans harrying them with fire throughout the whole process, it proved to be quite the ordeal. Eventually, however, after days of brutal house-to-house fighting, the Americans secured most of the city come the 9th, with the last few stubborn pockets of resistance being cleared by the 12th. Overall casualties for the battle are unclear. We know that the Americans suffered 442 casualties and made up of at least 60 killed and 250 wounded, and that at least 1,500 Germans were captured, but that's about it. The Battle of Castle Itter. And now for what will almost certainly be the weirdest battle of today's video, the Battle of Castle Itter, which was fought on the 5th of May 1945 at the titular castle in Austria. So, what was so weird about this one? Well, it would be because it saw the Americans, the French, and the Austrian resistance team up with the Germans. And no, you didn't mishear us, they really did team up with the Germans. And just who were the enemy in this bizarre engagement, we hear you cry. Well, that would also be the Germans, let me explain. The castle, occupied by the SS in 1943, became a prison for notable figures, including former French prime ministers and generals, and as the war neared its end, they were coming to clean house, as it were. Major Joseph Gangler, who had recently defected to the Austrian resistance from the German military, wasn't having any of that, and so he deployed the few men he had at his command, grabbed some passing Americans, dished out some tools to the prisoners, and got ready to meet the SS head-on. Tragically, Gangler was killed in the defense, but succeeded in his objective of protecting the prisoners. Today, he is remembered as a hero in Austria. The Battle of Crucifix Hill. Next, let's take a look at the rather ominously named Battle of Crucifix Hill, which was fought on the 8th of October 1944 just outside of Haaren, Germany, as part of the American Army's drive into Germany. The battle was named after the large crucifix that adorned the peak of the hill, rather than anything poetic about how horrible it was, a hill that was also heavily fortified with numerous pillboxes and bunkers. In response to these robust fortifications, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Leonard Jr. attacked the hill with specialized teams carrying heavy ordnance. Flamethrowers, Bangalore torpedoes, demolitions chargers in the front, and a heavy scattering of tank destroyers and self-propelled guns in the rear. This ferocious arsenal led to the hill falling soon enough, although the effort wasn't hurt by acts of individual bravery, such as that displayed by Captain Bobby Brown of the 1st Infantry Division, who took out 3 pillboxes despite being wounded, for which he earned the Medal of Honor. Come the 12th, 2 German infantry regiments would have a crack at retaking the hill, which they did, but were soon sent back down to where they came from, courtesy of a US counterattack that inflicted heavy casualties. The Battle of Luxembourg. The Battle of Luxembourg was part of the broader German invasion of France. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given the size of the tiny country, it lasted for but a single day, being fought on the 10th of May 1940. Come the time of the invasion, the Luxembourg military consisted of 425 regular soldiers with 246 auxiliary policemen being drafted in just to boost numbers. Facing them was a 50,000-strong German force. So yes, naturally, the Germans absolutely walked this one, quickly brushing aside the minor resistance that was offered in a few isolated skirmishes. And with that, the city of Luxembourg was occupied come lunchtime, with the whole country following it around tea time. Luxembourg's government, along with Grand Duchess Charlotte, managed to flee and eventually set up a government in exile in London. The invasion resulted in a few casualties on both sides, with Luxembourg even suffering 7 wounded and 76 captured, while the Germans lost 36 killed and 52 wounded. The country would remain under German control for a little over 4 years, eventually being liberated by the Americans on the 10th of September 1944. The Battle of River Plate. It's been a while since we had a naval battle, so here's another one. The Battle of Naval Plate, which was fought off the coast of Argentina and Uruguay on the 13th of December 1939. Occurring at such an early date, it was also the first naval battle of the whole war. It featured the Germans, who had only one ship, albeit one which was a bit of a unit, the heavy cruiser Admiral Graf Spee, and opposing her was the heavy cruiser Exeter and the light cruisers Ajax and Achilles. These were all nominally British ships, but Achilles was then crewed by the New Zealand Navy. As for the reason it was fought, that was simple enough. Graf Spee had been raiding British commerce traffic in the South Atlantic, and her opponents, finding all of that rather objectionable, sought to put her on the seabed as thanks. And that's exactly what they did, kind of. The Graf Spee took a hell of a shooting in the short battle, but managed to limp out of the fray, still afloat. Unfortunately for her, however, neutral Uruguay, not wishing to invoke the ire of the British, gave her only 72 hours to make repairs before she was booted out of the port. And so, to avoid further loss of life, her captain scuttled her on the 17th of December. All of her opponents received heavy damage, but they all stayed afloat and made it home, making the battle a resounding victory for the Allies. The Battle of Koch. Back to Poland now for the Battle of Koch, which lasted from the 2nd to the 5th of October 1939 and was also the final significant engagement of the German invasion. In it, tattered remnants of the Polish army, commanded by General Franciszek Kleeberg, engaged the mobilized forces of General Gustav Anton von Wittersheim. Naturally, this one was a loss for Poland, and despite achieving local successes, their forces, which numbered 18,000, ultimately surrendered due to a critical lack of ammunition. The Poles put up a good fight, successfully repelling several German attacks and even recapturing some positions before their surrender. The battle ended with the Poles taking up to 300 casualties and costing the Germans up to 500 in return. The Battle of Rennell Island. Next, we have the Battle of Rennell Island, the last significant naval engagement of the Guadalcanal campaign, which was fought on the 29th through the 30th of January 1943. It took place between the US and Japanese navies just off the Solomon Islands and saw the latter aiming to protect a planned evacuation of Guadalcanal by keeping the Americans' hands full. With that in mind, Japanese land-based torpedo bombers targeted the US fleet, resulting in the sinking of the heavy cruiser Chicago and significant damage to the cruiser La Valette, which took a torpedo in her forward engine room. This, plus the successful evacuation of the remaining troops from Guadalcanal, came on the 7th of February, and made the battle a resounding victory for the Japanese, who had managed to achieve their objective at the loss of only 12 medium bombers. The US defeat, however, did not significantly alter the strategic outcome of the broader Guadalcanal campaign. Sure, the Americans had eggs smeared all over their faces by this one battle, but they still retook Guadalcanal, so they weren't exactly too bothered. The Battle of West Hubei. One last peek at the Chinese theatre now as the video begins to reach its end. The Battle of West Hubei. It was fought between the 5th of May and the 11th of June 1943, between the Chinese, obviously, and the Japanese. Hubei province itself was an area of vital importance for China, as it housed significant industrial and government apparatuses, and thus, with the East Coast and its many, many important cities now firmly occupied, the Chinese could not afford to be pushed out, and sure enough, they weren't, as they managed to hold the line and see the Japanese off. The Chinese forces, numbering 280,000 troops and supported by American aerial units, faced off against 120,000 Japanese soldiers. Heavy casualties were taken on both sides as fighting most fierce overtook the land, with China suffering just over 23,000 killed and just over 18,000 wounded. The Japanese incurred 25,000 killed and wounded, with the destruction of 40 aircraft and damage to 122 river vessels. The Battle of Hill 609. Back to North Africa for one last time now as we move to have a look at the battle for Hill 609, which as part of the Tunisian campaign was fought on the 27th of April to the 1st of May 1943. It saw American forces under Major General Omar Bradley face German forces of the famous Afrika Korps commanded by General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim. As for Hill 609 itself, that refers to a crucial strategic height that the Germans used for artillery spotting and observation, and thus allowed them to heavily dictate the movements of local American forces, so naturally, the Americans wanted it for themselves in order to flip the table. It was a tough battle, to be sure, but despite heavy fighting and taking significant casualties, just shy of 2,500 all in, the Americans succeeded in taking it by the 30th and repelled German counterattacks the following day, after which the battle came to a close. As for the German casualties, sadly, We just don't know. The Siege of Scio. For our penultimate entry, let's return to that most elusive theatre in World War II, Sub-Saharan Africa, specifically with the Siege of Scio, which was then part of Italian East Africa, i.e. occupied Ethiopia. The siege lasted from the 25th of March to the 6th of July 1941 and saw Allied forces consisting of Belgian, British, South African and Ethiopian resistance fighters besiege the local Italian garrison, led by Generals Carlo de Simone and Pietro Gazzara. The Italians actually had the numbers on their side here, as they had, give or take, 8,000 men holding out against 5,000 or so Allied troops, and between that and heavy rains and their resultant logistical issues that hit the attackers, they initially held out quite well. Eventually, though, enough was enough, and Major General Auguste Guilleret led a final assault on the 3rd of July, which led to the Italians' final surrender 3 days later. The Belgo-Congolese forces suffered 462 casualties, mostly due to disease, while the Italians had approximately 1,200 casualties and 6,454 captured. The Battle of Anzio. And for our last entry, let's have a look at the Battle of Anzio, which was fought as part of the Italian campaign from the 22nd of January to the 5th of June 1944. It began with an Allied amphibious landing, Operation Shingle, which was aimed at outflanking German forces and facilitating an attack on Rome. Initially commanded by US Major General John Lucas, the operation achieved good results and with minimal opposition, but Lucas's cautious approach allowed German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring to reinforce defenses around the beachhead. From there, the Allied forces, which comprised American, British and Canadian troops, faced heavy German counterattacks and artillery bombardments. This led to inconclusive fighting and high casualties, and thus Lucas's replacement by Major General Lucien Truscott. In May, the Allies finally broke out of the beachhead, but instead of cutting off the Germans, Clark diverted forces towards Rome purely out of ego, as he wanted to be the man who marched into Rome as its liberator. This decision allowed the German forces to retreat and regroup, and caused no end of bother further down the line. The battle was a costly one across both sides, with approximately 43,000 Allied and 40,000 German casualties.